Welcome to the Halloween edition of the Indie Film Hustle podcast, episode number 19. There is beauty in the grotesque, and cows are evil. Guillermo del Toro.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, guys, to a Halloween edition of the Indie Film Hustle podcast. I am your spooky host, Alex Ferrari. Don't forget to head on over to freefilmbook.com. That's freefilmbook.com to get your free download of any audiobook of over 40,000 audiobooks. So head on over, freefilmbook.com. So this episode's a really a fun episode. I wanted to bring in Edwin Pagan from latinhorr.com. We really, Eddie and I have known each other for a long time and wanted to have him come over. I thought it would be a perfect Halloween edition of the show. And we started just jamming on everything that's horror, the state of horror film, obviously Latin horror genre, as well as a ton of other very cool stuff. So I want you guys to take a quick listen to the intro to his website.
If you're a fan of horror and the macabre, visit the website that's stirring up a revolution in the genre of horror and helping establish a new one, latinhorror.com, the first English-language website dedicated to Latin horror, featuring the leading dark creative expressionists, from seasoned masters to up-and-coming Latin horror files whose work is grounded in horror, the macabre, and gothic arts. Trailers, in-depth reviews and profiles, plus advanced screenings and exclusive giveaways. Latin Horror, the destination for horror files everywhere. LatinHorror.com. Register today, because there will be sangre.
That was like so awesome. I just had to put it in the podcast. Eddie's awesome, man. And like I said, we talk about his perspective as a cinematographer, working with indie filmmakers over the years, tips on cinematography, tips for indie filmmakers, how to make a horror movie, what's a good horror movie, all sorts of cool stuff. So sit back. If you're alone in the dark, be careful because this might be a little scary for you. So enjoy the interview with Eddie Pagan of latinhorror.com. Edwin, thank you so much for joining us on this Halloween edition of Indie Film Hustle podcast.
Thanks for having me on, man. It's a pleasure after, knowing you for so long and seeing you do this this new initiative, which is fantastic. I like what you're doing with it, brother.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much. Yeah, we met, this is what, 2004, 2005, yeah, something like that? 2004. Yeah, something like that. We met, around the time Broken was around, and then we met at Nalip, if I'm not mistaken,
yes,
the National Association of Latin Independent Producers. So we worked on a bunch of projects then. But yeah, it's another thing, man. A lot of people don't realize relationships. Like you meet people and you create these relationships over years, and they're very valuable in the future, without question.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, we talk about your what you're doing. And one of the ones I listened to the other night was precisely about that. You were talking about how filmmakers need to really build relationships and not just think that because they're on social media, they have a direct link to people's, attention.
Right.
And I think that's something that's happened with people like you and I who, know each other for quite a while, aren't in contact all the time, mm-hmm. but can say, let's roll on this. And it gets done because we know what's there. There's an undercurrent of history, et cetera, that we know.
Exactly. It's like if I called you up, I'm like, hey man, I want to do something with Latin horror, and because we have that relationship, you'd be mm-hmm. like, yeah, and like when we decided to do this podcast, you just called me up. It's like, hey, let's do it, as opposed to just being a cold call.
Right.
And just like not knowing you. But that relationship, I mean, we're talking, 10 years now?
Yeah. I know. Yeah, no, if you were to call me, I know what I'm getting. So it's like, I know what, the curatorial process is becomes secondary because I know what I'm getting already. Exactly.
That's something that a lot of filmmakers don't get. I get constantly bombarded with now, since Indie Film Hustle is growing at such a rapid pace. I'm starting to get people just sending over scripts.
Right.
They're like, hey, can I, where can I get money? I'm like, who are you? Like, what's your name? Hi, how are you? And I had another guy the other day contact me on Facebook, And he was so sweet and so nice about everything. And then we started a conversation. And then I started to build a relationship with him a little bit. But he took interest in what I was doing. And it's just basic like manners almost. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the problem with social media. It's become, that's all eliminated. People want to say what they want to say and make it gospel, and then they want to cut to the chase when it's their turn to do something. And there is no manners, there is no protocol. And, and with, as we both know, this business takes up so much of our time that you got to have protocol, because you got to wedge in there at the right time and not become a nuisance, or else, your emails get blocked.
Your emails get blocked and you never get seen, which is what that podcast that was podcast. Oh God, I don't even remember the number of it, but it's the Are You an Indie Filmmaker spammer.
Right. I enjoyed that one a lot.
Yeah, because I thought it was something that someone should say. So anyway, we went off topic, or we haven't even started our interview yet. I want to ask you, can you tell everybody a little bit about why you started latinhorr.com?
Sure. As you and I both know, and other filmmakers that are listening to this, you work on these big projects sometimes, and I work a lot as a producer and a cinematographer. And what happens is, you come off these projects, and all of a sudden you're crushing through a sugar rush, because you feel like right now there's nothing else on your plate, and you're fiending for something. And I remember one time, this was in the beginning of 2008. I was kind of looking for something to keep me occupied innately with my skills and interests that would do that between projects. And I knew that writing would probably be part of it. And, I'm a big horror fan, and I'm Latino. And one day when I was thinking about that, it just struck me. Those three words kind of floated around my head for a minute. And I was like, oh, Latin horror. But, I didn't think it would be out there. I would think that there wouldn't be interest so much. I knew I was interested. But I said, no, it can't be that easy. This must already have been grabbed up, the idea, the website, all of it. And when I started looking around, no, there was no website with that name. There were no magazines with that name. There was no one really talking about it in that regard. I mean, if they were talking about Mexican horror or Spanish horror, et cetera, yes, because it's in a nationalistic keyframe. But as a whole, as us talking about us as a distinct genre, nobody was talking about that. And I only came across a couple of DVDs as an anthology with 3 like B-grade movies out of Mexico that were being sold online. And they were packaged as Latin horror, because when you bring it over, you can't say Hispanic or Mexican horror that much. You have to say, Latinos. This is Latinos. So they said Latin horror, but it was more as a title than a brand or a genre. And I started working on the website throughout that year and launched it on Halloween of 2008. A friend of mine wanted to put up as part of the website a place where people could register, and I allowed him to do that. And I hadn't checked back on it in a couple of months. When I came back, I had around 3,000 people that had registered.
Oh, wow.
And that blew my mind, because it was like, there's a big interest for this. But, it was an even split between Latinos and non-Latinos, because horror fans are avid.
Yeah.
If you hear anything horror, you're going to it. And they were like, what's this thing? He's talking about Latin horror. And at the time, I was using a moniker that was, first came rock en español, now we have Latin horror. Because they went through the same. When rockeros were doing rock en español, people were like, what's that? Even though the name kind of told you what it was.
Right.
Now you don't have that issue. Rock en español is what it is. And I think the same over the last, set of years, almost like 7-8 years, people have come on board with the concept as well. I have people, about 20 or 30 DVDs that I get a year, where people have self-proclaimed the genre they're working in as Latin horror.
Oh, cool.
It's not so far-fetched for people to say that and click with it anymore. And it's expanding. So, I can't claim to have created the genre. People working in it, they just hadn't sort of consolidated into a brand or genre, and kind of like saying we're taking ownership of it under this umbrella. That I can claim, but it's really to make sure that it just moved forward, and that we're all working together and can take ownership of our own genre, the same as Japanese horror or Italian
Korean
horror, giallo, Korean horror,
right? Sure.
And so now little by little we're also fleshing out what that is, because when you first come up with a concept, you still, have to really historically carve it out, and what does it mean in a trajectory over time. And, those have come before and created work that fits.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And sort of, create the brand in a way that makes sense for everyone, not just because you had an idea.
Now, I have a question for you. Now, I love good horror. I'm not a huge, I don't like blood and guts.
Right.
I enjoy the old slasher flicks from the 80s. Those are fun, but I'm not. It's not something I actually go after. So I'm not familiar with a lot of Latin horror, to be honest with you, other than obviously Guillermo del Toro, he's probably the leader of the movement,
right?
And what he does, and I think this is a broader question in regards to Latin culture in general. But right. I know Mexican horror. I've heard of Mexican horror. Is there Nicaraguan horror? Is there Colombian horror? Is there Argentinian horror?
There are spurts of it. I think one of the biggest South American, Central American countries that's sort of on the leading cusp of it is Argentina right now.
Mm-hmm. They have great filmmakers.
They have great, and and one of the things that's interesting is that in this past year, the country proper, the government actually started trying to revive their film industry, and that came as a direct result of the Argentinian filmmakers that are working in genre there, but specifically horror, who were getting a lot of attention outside the country, and the country looked at itself and said, we really have to push this. And, it's interesting that the genre of horror itself was the one that's kind of reactivated the industry there. Mexican horror, as you said, they've been doing it forever. They're really good at it. Spain is at the leading end of a lot of horror films. And I think, what we're talking about is that the difference is, and I think Guillermo del Toro summed it up best quite a few years ago when he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said that American horror attempts to destroy the physical, the body, right? We talked about that with the slasher, porn, and all of that, which, it can be fun sometimes, right? You want to see how the best new gimmick to destroy a human being, right? And that can be fun, but it gets old after a few films and it's the same gimmick.
Right.
But Latin horror on the other spectrum is about destroying the mind and the soul, right? So it really goes back to the suspense, the supernatural, what's lurking in the shadows. There's all these characters from Latino folklore, like El Cuco, La Llorona, the Weeping Woman,
sure, of course,
etc. And one of the things that makes that particularly terrifying, like in the case of El Cuco, for instance, is that when your parents tell you, you have to go to bed or you have to finish your homework or else El Cuco is going to get you, the fact remains that they never explain exactly what El Cuco is.
Can you tell me? I've actually never heard of El Cuco. I've heard of
really?
I've never heard of. I'm Cuban,
okay,
so I have not heard. I've not heard of El Cuco. I've heard of Llorona. I've heard of ton, but never heard of El Cuco.
Weeping Woman.
Yeah. So what's El Cuco?
El Cuco, but that's the interesting thing about El Cuco. It's a lot in Mexico and Puerto Rico, and it's not described in any fashion. It's just some ethereal being that if you don't behave is going to come in the middle of the
boogeyman.
And the boogeyman to some degree, the Kraken, whatever. But El Cuco, there's no description of what it is. And because of that, your mind fills in the blank. If you're like an 8-year-old child in a room and your mother tells you better go to bed or El Cuco's going to get you, you're ducking under those sheets and your mind is filling in what El Cuco is because it's never described.
Right.
And I think that, that goes to our idiosyncratic literature traditions of sort of Latin America, Spain, Mexico, South and Central America, where we have a long tradition of storytelling, and a lot of it is Gothic. A lot of it has to do with our religious faith, beliefs, and we fill in those blanks. And so, to us, going to see a horror movie, and as you said, a good horror movie, you're making this distinction between the stuff that has all plot, and then this happens, and then that happens, and there's bodies falling, heads are coming off, versus Latin horror, which is a lot grounded in story. In character,
mythology, right?
And mythology and our idiosyncratic traditions of storytelling. And that's a big thing that's making a difference where a lot of people are gravitating to it because, even in American, culture, are coming on board because they're looking at it the way they looked at their horror in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, where it was more about that, you know. And I think people are sort of like thirsty for that again. And so you're starting to little by little see the dial turn back the other way, where a lot of these movies that are coming out in a, you know, so-called slasher porn are not doing so well at the box office because people, you know, people at the end of the day are intelligent. They want their buttons pushed in a way that you know, that pulls that adrenaline out and sort of takes them to another level. And even though the slasher films do that, and I'm a fan of them too to some degree, it isn't the same as when you're sort of manipulated like a puppet on a string by a master, like someone like Guillermo and others, who really know how to do that in a way that it isn't just a cat jumping out of the cupboard, you know.
Right.
It really holds you, you know, you have white knuckles on the theater seat versus, you know, just whiplashing back because, you know, something jumped out all of a sudden. And that happens, you know, and there's blood in Latin horror to some degree, but it isn't about that.
Well, yeah,
the story and character is still always king and queen.
Right. So like I was watching an interview with Guillermo the other day in regards to his to Pan's Labyrinth.
Right.
And I start thinking back, you think of when I thought of Guillermo, I'm like, oh yeah, he's that horror guy. I mean, obviously he's done many other things, but you know, he's like, oh yeah, he's the horror guy. He did this, but then you start thinking back, like his films are not violent or bloody in that sense.
Not at all.
They're not. They're very psychological.
Exactly.
And there was a great line that he said, which was awesome. That somebody told him when he did Pan's Labyrinth that he goes, "It's a really good movie. Maybe you should bring down the violence a bit." So it can reach a broader audience. And Guillermo goes, I don't care about a broader audience. I want its audience to enjoy it. You know, there's people who love it and people who will hate it, but that's why I wanted to make my movie, which is such a great statement to say as a filmmaker. Like,
and you see that even in his lifestyle as a working artist, where he'll do a big blockbuster like Pacific Rim, and then he'll go back and do something like he's doing now
with Crimson
Peak.
Yeah. Which is, and there's not really anybody else that could do something like that on a studio level at this point. There's nobody else that the studio would give. And it's a low budget too, right? Crimson Peak's not. It's
relatively, you know, I think where you're seeing the bigger scale of the budget is almost in the promotion of it. But I think that as blockbusters go, this is not a tentpole film, but it has that production value because he's such a genius when it comes to production design and sort of building out the world of his films that, you know, they're 10 times lusher than the fiscal allotment is going to, you know, show. And yet he pulls it out. And
then he just said also that his budget for visual effects on the entire movie is like $3-4 million, which is insane for a scope of a film like that. But then you but he knows how to do it. He learned a lot in Pans. Like he did all of that for like $2 million, 2 to 3.
Well, there's one thing that a lot of people don't know is that actually when Guillermo del Toro started, he started out doing makeup effects, special effects, practical effects, and effects. So he knows that world inside out. That's where he started before he started directing. So, you know, he's one of those people who's a natural born illustrator and artist and visual artist. And so, you know, to him, that goes hand in hand. There is no separating Guillermo from the visual artist. So, you know, he gets kudos for being this amazing director, but he's a born natural visual artist. And, you know, the Gothic and the macabre is his wellspring. And so when you put those two things together, ain't nobody pulling it out of the hat like he can.
No. He is a very unique voice in the world today, especially as a filmmaker, no question. Now, let me ask you a question. Why do you love horror films so much?
You know, that's an interesting question. I still to this day can't answer that. I mean, I love how they make me feel. I like the suspense that's born out of it, you know, whenever I go to a dark theater and I'm sharing this experience with 300-400 other people. But the genesis of it began actually when I was a kid. My sister at the time, my sister's a lot older than me. She's about 18 years older than me. So I was about, 7, 8, 9 at the most. And my sister would, you know, at the time she was dating the gentleman that ultimately would become her husband and father of her children. And my mother, on the other hand, wasn't having it. And she would have me go along on these dates, you know? And I guess they liked horror, you know, or it was her fiance's knack of taking her there because he knew she would have to wrap her arms around him.
Of course.
And they would always take me along, and
we'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
The first movie we ever saw together was Tales of the Crypt, the original British production.
Oh, wow.
And then the next movie that we saw together was The Exorcist.
Oof.
And, yeah, I know, top heavy stuff that I don't think I should have even been seen at that age. But there was something about it, the fear and the thought that remained with me all, like weeks afterwards. And it wasn't a fear like I was cringing on the covers. It was like, I want more. It was almost like I became addicted to it to some degree, And then, as I was able to go to the theater on my own with my friends, et cetera, we would always gravitate. And then again, I came of age as a teenager, et cetera, in the 80s. So, this is, Halloween and all these fantastic, The Thing, which is one of my favorite movies. I grew up in that time where all these movies were out, and they did have a little bit of the gore. They did have a lot of,
the Freddys and the Jasons,
bodies,
sure.
Hitting the floor, but they were also character driven. And, we're talking a lot about the visual effects were practical effects, which always seems to sell a movie more than just 100% digital. And, I don't know. I think I was lucky in that sense that I was exposed to it at the right age, became hooked to it. And, grew up in an age where horror was the flavor of the month. People were really into their horror films at that time.
I remember. Yeah. I mean, Freddy, they used to sell Freddy like action figures.
Exactly.
To kids. It was the 80s where you can sell an R-rated movie merchandise. There was I think the RoboCop. Yeah. The RoboCop toys.
Nobody, your parents said, okay, you're going to go to movies. That's all he's going to be somewhere safe.
Exactly.
They weren't too keen on vetting the content. Oof. And,
can you imagine
for better or worse, I think, it had a pronounced impact on me. And I think that was the genesis, but, got hooked and have been a horror lover and patron ever since.
Now, what makes a good horror movie?
Well, I think we go back to the basis of El Cuco. I think a good horror movie is the movie that sort of keeps you in suspense until the payoff, right? Mm-hmm. And again, if we go to the distinction between American horror movies and Latin horror movies, or non-Latino horror movies, not just to keep picking on the American horror movies, part of what happens is that from frame one in the non-Latino horror movie, people are dropping, heads are coming off, people are vanishing, and we don't kind of take it, we're a little spooked, but there's no, we got to get out of here. There's no, something really terrible is going on here. And we're sort of negating it, like 50% to 90% that anything really horrible is taking place. That's why people keep dropping, right? There's they keep falling into the mousetrap, even though there's already a mouse, kind of cut in half there. And in a Latino horror movie, from frame one, we believe that there's something going on, that there's a spirit, that there's a demon, that there's an entity, that there's some sort of otherworldly phenomenon going on. And so we that's it. That's done. That's a done deal. We take it for granted because of our religious beliefs, etc. And then we go forward wanting to know why it's happening. How can I get rid of it? How can I, get back to normal? And one of the things you'll see in a lot of horror movies, that a lot of it is it's unresolved sort of otherworldly tension. For instance, somebody died in the house in a very horrific way, and now their spirit is in limbo until someone can find out who it was that killed them and sort of bring around closure on that, right? Mm-hmm. And again, it's story-based. So there's this whole sequence playing out throughout the movie where we're interacting with this thing and not just trying to avoid it, even though it's definitely interacting with us.
Now, what would and you might have the answer to this? It's just where was the origins of horror? Like, what's the oldest horror story? I mean, I'm going back to the Christmas Carol with the ghosts, but where's some of the first Genesis? Like, did the Greeks talk about? Horror?
The Greeks definitely talked about tragedy, the foibles of men, etc.
Sure.
And there's a lot of darkness in those. But I think a lot of it came from Europe, when the plagues were going on.
Right.
Even before that, we're talking about the Middle Ages where, the Gothic era was in full play. We're not talking about Gothic in the sense of England in the 1700s, 1800s when they were now writing about it. But, it goes way back where even
1200s, 1300s.
1300s, where you certainly see these things playing out in a very real way, where people were taking it as gospel to some degree, that what was making these things happen were not natural, but from another world, from someone was causing this to happen. And then you come into the 16, 1700, 1800s, where you have even nursery rhymes based on these plagues.
I know.
They're cute, and then you
Ring Around the Rosie.
Exactly. You listen to the words. We're talking about the Black Plague. Why are we singing this to my 4-year-old?
I know. It's just like I was singing it because I've twin daughters now. They're almost 4, and then they were singing "Ring Around the Rosie," pocket full of poetry, and I'm like, and then we all fall down. I'm like, that's about the freaking plague.
That's about the plague. But I think that what's colored a lot of modern, movies, horror movies, has been definitely the Gothic period in England, where they were masters of sort of that storytelling technique. When Frankenstein was written,
Dracula,
Dracula, and also the Grimm, the Germany, the Grimm's fairy tales, etc. But then you have it sort of like then colored by the palette of German expressionism and sort of that look, which if you sort of look at the directors of the 20s and 30s that came here and started even working in Hollywood, most of them were like from Germany, etc. And they brought over into those horror films that palette of German expressionism, which kind of is like a precursor to film noir, et cetera. But, that if you look at any horror film, where even if it's in color, we're still using that sort of that palette of darks and shadows, chiaroscuro, for lack of a better word, where we're doing that. And I've had incidents on a film set as a cinematographer where I kick over a light by mistake, or someone does, and it hits the floor. If the bulb doesn't burst, I look at him like, oh, that's perfect. Leave it there. It looks fantastic. It created some new shadows we hadn't even seen. Or you turn off a light by mistake and you say, oh, that's better. It was overlit before. This is much better.
Right.
And so you have this whole psyche coming out of those periods that's still what's kind of coloring cinema today, the best cinema. That's actually a Crimson Peak. That's where you can see Guillermo del Toro flourishing the best, because he's going back to these romantic Gothic novels as an inspiration for the work he's doing now, and he lives there.
Right. Yeah, and I've seen that video of his Bleak House.
Exactly.
Which is just insane. His house of, I mean, it's like it's a playground. It's so beautiful. The man has built the ultimate man cave.
I know. I mean, I would kill to have something like that. And I think I was just telling my girlfriend last night. I said I'd settle for the man room instead of that mansion he has. Right. And it's interesting because I was at the New York Times building just last night, and they were for a Times talk, and Guillermo del Toro was the person who was supposed to be the featured guest, and then they announced just before we went in that he had gotten ill and wasn't going to be able to attend, so it's kind of a bummer. But the man is all over the place these days.
Oh God, man, is he ever?
But he loves it, because he's not only promoting himself, but he's also he has that Midas touch that when he finds young talent, their work gets greenlit and he's moving it forward. And you see his distinctive style, even though he's not the one directing a particular film that he produces or comes on as executive producer. You see his thumbnail print all over it, and he's remarkable in that sense, and hopefully, I mean, it just keeps opening up doors for other people working in genre that are respectable to the craft to continue to blossom, and we can get more intelligent horror films out there.
Exactly. Now, with that said, what do you feel? How do you feel about all of these found footage, paranormal activity style horror films?
I'm not into it. I got to say, I've seen one or two that have captivated me for an hour or two. But for the most part, I remember years ago, I went to see the one that started a lot of this, Blair Witch,
sure,
here in New York at the Anthology Film Archives, because I think that the filmmakers originated here in New York, and I think they did one of the early screenings here in New York. And I went to see it, and I had gotten caught up with the mythology.
Oh no, it was brilliantly marketed.
Brilliant.
Oh my God, brilliantly
and
marketed.
you couldn't tell what was real and not. And then I went to see the movie, and I think 45 minutes in, I actually left.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Oh, really?
And if it hadn't been, I saw it later on because I wanted to really see what really happened. But I remember leaving, sneaking out. And then, if it wasn't for the fact that it was a free screening, I probably would have went to the box office and demanded my money back.
Right.
And that's not to put the movie down. It's just that particular, we all have a taste for things. Some are acquired, some are just naturally part of what we desire. And I never really sort of bought into that particular style subgenre of horror. And, I don't know. For me, it just doesn't do it for me, with the whole shaky cam, which I've seen done very well in other films like Wreck, Spanish film, But for the most part, I don't know. I haven't yet to seen something that's blown me away in that genre. So, others would have a different take on it. But, all I can answer that from is my personal point of view.
Yeah. I mean, when I saw Blair Witch too, I saw it. I don't even remember if I knew what was going on. The only thing I thought that was missing in Blair Witch is at the very end when the camera falls on the ground.
Right.
I just wanted to see a pair of floating feet.
Yes.
That's all I needed.
Yeah.
I get chills even thinking about it. If I would have just seen
those
glimpse.
Those guys have done well, and they continue to work.
Edward Sanchez is his name?
Yeah.
The one of the co-directors. Yeah. He's working. He's working now on From Dusk Till Dawn, the series.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
everybody starts. You got to think about this as like the formative work, right? So,
oh God, no! But it was I will never take anything away from it. I think they have one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns in the last 30 years. Honestly,
absolutely, and they started a genre.
Pretty much,
they can't take that away from them. I'm just saying that personally on my end, found footage films are not my cup of tea. But other than that, it's not a. It's just about taste sometimes.
Now, what's your favorite subgenre of horror? That there are many different subgenres of horror. What's your favorite kind of horror?
Well, I'm still I'm still finding that people are doing really interesting things with the zombie genre.
Which is very hot, obviously.
Which is very hot, but I think that it's also, it's a good thing to play with because I think that, what more horrible an idea than anyone can all of a sudden turn against you
and eat you,
kill you, and eat you. Eat you alive. It's not like they're gonna like tranquilize you first. They eat you alive,
right?
So you're being consumed and going through that pain. So I think that I've become a big zombie fan. There's a lot of shows, obviously, that
The Walking Dead,
made it big. Sure. Walking Dead. The lead up after that, etc. But I think that still people are exploring it in interesting ways. And what's interesting? Here's a little trivia for people that may not know. The godfather, or I should say the grandfather of the zombie genre is Latino.
Of course. George Romero.
Exactly. George Romero, Cuban-American from the Bronx.
I didn't know he was Cuban. George is
Cuban-American, bro.
Wow.
He's a paisano.
Gente.
He's a paisano, so a Cubano.
Wow, I didn't know he was
from
Cuban.
the South Bronx.
Right.
Created the
genre.
The zombie genre as we know it. That's not to say that zombies didn't exist before that, because there are films that they appear in some form, and particularly with films out of that cover supposedly show Haiti with the voodoo, etc.
Sure,
where they had these sort of walking slaves, where chemicals are thrown in their face and concoctions, and all of a sudden they're at the beck and call of their master. So, but in terms of what we know the zombie as, what it's kind of evolved to, he created that in Night of the Living Dead,
right? And
Maestro de los Zombies es un Latino.
I know, right? It's a lot of people don't know that. You're right. A lot of people don't understand that the zombies started with George in that black and white movie, which fell into public domain. And I don't understand. Yes. I really one day would love to know why that happened.
Yeah, I know that it was a mistake that the producers did at one point.
Obviously.
Yeah, and it went into that, the exact things. He never really talks about it too much. He just cracks up about how they messed up big time.
Yeah.
And he uses more expletive words because he's like that when he's being into it. He just like, he just throws it out there.
All right.
But, it's funny because I think there's Latin horror on Saturday, October 24th here in New York City. Is doing an event where Bobby Sonabia, who's a very well-known band leader musician, we're going to be showing the film with the Bronx Music Heritage Center as a public event where we're going to be showing the movie Night of the Living Dead in black and white, with Bobby and his bandmates actually doing the score to the movie like they did in the silent days of the film. So that's going to be a nice little event.
Oh, it'll be so much fun.
Yeah, so that kind of stuff, so obviously, if it wasn't public domain, we probably couldn't pull that one off.
Right.
But, it's sad though. But, like he said in interviews before, the world is better for it to some degree, even though his bank account isn't.
Right, because everyone now gets to see it, and it'll probably get farther distributed, if you will.
Yeah, and then look what it's caused with the fact that, it wasn't a patented idea.
No, it wasn't exactly.
All this other horror stuff probably wouldn't have gotten to the level if they would have had the reins on it.
And like movies like is it Dawn of the Dead? It's the one in the mall.
Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, that was like you look at it was George that did that one, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that movie,
and the 30 others of the dead.
Yeah, exactly. But that specific one, I remember watching something talking about the basically social commentary he was making.
Oh, exactly.
It wasn't just about a bunch of zombies. It was about so you can start looking deeper into it than just, of course there was some blood and guts in it, but if you look at it, he was making social commentary about the times and things like that, which was what good art should do, regardless of genre.
And, and it's interesting because film scholars and people that deconstruct images, particularly in film, have noted many times that more than any other genre, horror does kind of become a frame of the times. If you look at many of the horror films, you'll see that they're sort of echoing a lot of the concerns and passions of the time in a different way. So it's known for sort of kind of becoming a sort of a time capsule for the period in which the film was done.
So then why is it now that apocalyptic zombie movies have become, and zombie genre has become so popular in today's world? That's a good question.
Well, I think, and I read an article recently about that. I forget who wrote it, but they were making the comparison with everything that's happening now with terrorism and how all these borders are being erased. And whereas at one point your enemy was you were able to point out your enemy because you were both wearing uniforms.
Right, one was wearing the black hat, one was wearing the white hat. Right,
exactly. And now that's been erased, and so a person down the street could be somebody looking out to destroy you or attack you, and vice versa, because we do it overseas as well. And so I think that's the genesis for sort of what's happening now with all of this stuff, that it could come from anywhere, viruses and things of that nature,
economic hits, that. There's a ton of
the whole global economy, and how all this sort of blurring of borders is now creating all these other blowback effects.
It sounds very true. Now, let me ask you, do you think it's tougher today to scare an audience member than it was 20 years ago?
I think so. I think we're very jaded. I myself find I go to a good horror film or, what I think is going to be a good horror film, because, you can be deceived by the trailers and all the publicity, and sometimes the film looks much better, in short runs, like a teaser or trailer or posters, and and you go see the film, and I'm sitting there practically laughing at how corny the execution of it is, or how bad the story is.
Right.
And so I think, and I think, but that's true of modern audiences across the board. I think we're, MTV educated us to be more sophisticated of how much information we can take in a minute with the fast cutting and this and that, just the linear time kind of consumption of images. And we're more intelligent. A lot of the stuff that we were afraid of in the 50s, 40s, and even before that, even in our Latin American literature, now we look at it and we're like, oh, that's an old wives' tale. And so for someone to really, come out and really pull the strings, in a way that really makes our adrenaline sort of bubble up and and our psyche get engaged in that way, in that dark space. It takes a lot more effort. And I think that's one of the reasons they're going back to old-fashioned storytelling, like the Gothic novels, the suspense, the thriller, instead of the slasher. The slashers are good. It's it's good like a roller coaster ride. But if you really want to get scared, you go into the haunted house.
Right. And the thing is, a slasher film, I think, in a lot of ways is a lot easier. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. To make then a psychological thriller or something that gets you in your bones or in your mind or in your soul.
I would have to agree with that to a certain degree, because that's not also,
it's not a blanket
really
statement.
Good one, the technique of having to make a lot of those slasher films pay off takes some skill.
And then some.
But I think when you have to really like finesse the story, the acting, and let those things play out, as you shot it on set, and then how it intercuts later when the editor and you are in there, cutting the film. There's a lot of skill in that, because, how long do you hold a shot? How
much blood is in the shot?
How much do you reveal? What you don't reveal? And sometimes, holding back some information till the right moment is all it takes, right? So it isn't about, oh, look at this, look at that, look at this. Sometimes it's just like, all right, you play with the audience. You hold a little bit of information that they're thinking about, that they're going to sort of, because everybody wants to figure it out. We go to horror film, any film these days, and from frame one, we swear we already know who the killer is, what's going to happen. And,
it's so tough. It's so tough being a filmmaker and a storyteller nowadays.
Exactly. So part of your job these days is how to, how to become that ringleader that's making, the lion jumped through the hoop, and all of a sudden an elephant comes through, and it's like, oh, what just happened? It's like, it's a tough genre, but it's, I think it's a genre that, every year they announce the death of the horror film and how it's, but it's the studios themselves, because it's always, they announce that starts coming to the fore when their big tent film comes, and then on their low season, they're putting out these more low budget films that provide a bigger return on the investment. All of a sudden, horrors are back in. It's it's crap. It's the game they play. So horror films are not going anywhere anytime soon, or anytime in the long run. So as long as we have the capacity to still feel fear and that sort of high end emotion of self-preservation in the face of here, it's not going anywhere.
No, agreed. And I was just watching something on Hitchcock the other day, who's one of my favorite directors of all time.
Oh yeah.
And the master of suspense, and he did a lot for suspense thrillers. Not as much horror, but suspense. Right. I mean, he was the guy. He was the master.
Exactly.
And how he shot Psycho specifically in black and white, because he didn't want to see any blood, because he can't stand blood. He said he couldn't stand blood, so he shot it in black and white, and that you barely, and during the infamous shower scene, you never ever see the knife go in, ever.
Oh no. It's just brilliant. It's up in the air, it's coming down.
Shot of the eye, shot of this. Yeah. And it's
masterful.
It's why everyone studies it. Everyone studies it. So you're also not only a horror maven and fan, but you're also a cinematographer. So what made you want to jump behind the camera as a cinematographer, as out of all the jobs that you could do in the film business?
Well, I started there. In the South Bronx when I was about 10 years old, my mother enrolled me in the boys clubs, the Madison Square Boys Club, Hoe Avenue Clubhouse in the South Bronx, as a way to keep me sort of reined in. This is the 80s and all this stuff is happening. Actually, it was when I was 10, it was the 70s. And so, a lot is going on in the South Bronx.
Oof, yeah.
And so she was raising me as a single parent, and we had just moved into the area, and she found out about the boys club and enrolled me there. And, I made friends very quickly there. And one of the things I discovered early on after becoming a member at the age of 10 was that they had a dark room in the basement. There was a gentleman there who was the art director for the Boys Club, Ernesto Lozano, who sort of became my teacher and mentor for about 8 years while I was, learning my craft. And it's ironic because I had only tripped into that as a bunch of my friends and I had gone into the wood shop right next door and the pottery room to get some clay so we can go outside and pelt each other with clay, have a clay fight in the street. And but when I went by the dark room, which was outside of those other two rooms, I stopped at the door frame for a moment because it was, this room is painted black. It was Ernesto was in there with two other students. And I was by the door a little too long. And he said, well, you're either in or out because you're just during the class. And I left, of course, because I wanted to be with my friends. But I came back the next day. And he started telling me when they met, what they could teach me, that it would be fun, that it would be creative. I had nothing to lose. And I started coming to the classes and I was hooked. I learned how to take photos, develop black and white film, make my own prints.
This thing film you speak of, what is that?
Oh, film. It's this chemical process. It's this salt, silver salts on an acetate that, it gets exposed to light.
You're speaking gibberish, sir. Are you okay?
I have fever. I had fever from last night. And I was hooked. The magic of it, of watching, a print come to life after you expose the paper and put it in the developer.
It's magical. It really is.
It's magical. And, but by the time I was about 17 or 18, I was called into the director's office, Ralph Porter. I still remember him kindly. He's a great man. And they asked me if I was interested in taking these two classes at School of Visual Arts that they had some vouchers for. One was in production, the other was in cinematography. So I went, the week of the first class, and I was in producing. At the time I'm 17, 18, crunching numbers, creating schedules. I was like, this is not for me. And so I went back the next day. I said, well, I don't know about that producing class at the time. And he says, well, that's fine. We'll give this one to another student, another member of the boys club. But go tomorrow and check out the one on cinematography. And, of course, that fit like a glove, right? There was nothing they were doing there that was foreign to me or wasn't interesting, except now we're working with moving pictures. And over the years, I just, little by little got into cinematography proper and ending up on people's sets, being kind of like a shadow. And little by little being given smaller jobs to do until, eventually I was the cinematographer on projects, both small and big. But in New York, mostly, smaller budgeted films, all indie work. But it was a great proving ground. And, Jesus Christ, it's what now? It's like, 25, 30 years that I've been a cinematographer.
And you've been most of that time you've been in New York?
In New York. For sure. So I've worked almost with everybody in New York who's done something. And the interesting thing is that, I've directed as well and written as well. But the one thing that I would still do innately if I'm given the choice is cinematography. I like directing, but, there's always that passion that you would do whether there was nothing else you could do. Mm-hmm. And I think photography and cinematography are still the things that I gravitate to the most.
Now, can you tell me a little bit about the New York independent film scene? Because I'm from LA and I'm originally from Miami, as you know.
Right.
So I know the Miami independent film scene, and I know the LA scene, but I don't know a lot about, other than what I've read and stuff like that.
Right.
How is it on the street, like, if you will, of the indie film scene there?
Well, one of the things that happens in New York that I think doesn't happen as much in other places is that, people really come together and it's kind of a testing, proving ground, a good way to learn. And a lot of people work on a lot of people's, they cross-pollinate projects. And so a lot of people go to film school here or just sort of get into the craft just by osmosis because, they're around people that do it or are interested. And so you get a lot of people that sort of are working on small projects and are looking for people to work with them. And, a lot of people that have the skills when they're in between other projects, sometimes even if they're seasoned craftspeople, will work on a smaller films because there's creativity on smaller projects that sometimes doesn't happen on bigger budgeted projects in terms of the fun that you can have and, how loose it is. And so I got into, when I started really becoming a cinematographer, I started sort of hanging out with other filmmakers that already had a little bit of a track record. And I remember one time distinctively a friend of mine who I had said that I wanted to get back into filmmaking because I also got into theater for a while. Mm-hmm. And after a small period there where I wasn't doing any film, a friend of mine, Sonia Gonzalez, who's a filmmaker herself, basically mentioned that a small group was forming in New York called NALIT, the National Association of Latino Independent Producers. And the organization itself hadn't been around very long at that time. They were forming chapters. The national board was sort of evolving. And I started going to these meetings, and, there would be 25, 30, 40 people there. They were meeting at that time at WNET 13 on West 30th Street. And, it was like just so, it's even hard to describe, because there was a feeling about all these young people that were creative sort of getting together and showing their sample work, or, showing an excerpt of something that there was a work in development, et cetera, or even showing work that had been broadcast, because you had some people coming in that had more experience. And, over the years, that group grew. I mean, it's grown from what it was at that time, probably about 3 or 4 chapters, to now, like, I think over 18 chapters across the country. And it's a force to be reckoned with. But a lot of the people that at that time that I was part of it have gone on to do, major work. Alex Rivera, Cristina Ibarra, Sonia Gonzalez, just.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Dozens of people who cut their teeth during that time just by interacting with each other, and have gone on to do, serious work in TV, in film, and documentary for the most part. But New York is like that. New York, people want to get together. And I've gone to LA, and I've done projects in LA, both commercials and narrative work. And if you hit the floor in LA on the West Coast for a period of time, and you talk to people about your projects, they all say, "Oh, I'm in." But when you're getting ready, you're getting closer. It's all about what's the budget and what's the line item for me. And, and I can respect that, right? Because I get pretty antsy when I get the script and it's all, this is a no budget thing. But you got to have a little wiggle room, but that's how LA is. LA is all business, and that's what you go there. It's a town to create and work, and the work there is primarily business. That's how you earn your living. And I think in New York, a lot of people do other things as they're developing their craft, and are willing to sort of roll their sleeves up with other filmmakers to get the experience too. So there's sort of a effervescence that bubbles up here in New York among independent filmmakers that you probably don't see anywhere else. And another thing that happens in New York is that because of the transportation hub, the infrastructure for people to get around, you can say, we're going to meet in an hour, and you can have 25 people meet at that location, because it isn't that hard to kind of get there.
Yeah, LA is not that easy.
West Coast, if you want to have a meeting, even if it's a membership meeting and you have it in LA and people are coming out from the outer regions or the Hollywood Hills or whatnot, it's going to probably take them an hour, 2 hours, or 3 hours in LA traffic, right? And so that's a turnoff, and it's a little harder to do it there. But New York, it's always been, and you have an active film hub in New York. The television industry is popping in New York, always has.
Yeah.
There were pockets of time where, it wasn't so much, but there's always activity in New York. You can't go out on a weekend or any weekday and walk anywhere in New York where you don't see some evidence of a film in production, whether it's small or large. It's just part and parcel. People don't even get taken aback anymore by seeing a film production. They just want to get by.
Right. It's very New York. I don't know. I don't know if you know this or not, but I lived in New York for 10 years when I was growing up. Yeah, I grew up in Queens. And the one thing I noticed, and people always ask me about LA and New York, and like, what's the difference as far as the film industry is concerned? And what I always say is, like, if the film industry literally left New York tomorrow, New York is New York. But if the film industry left Los Angeles today, it's gone. The city would come crumbling down around it. That's
a fantastic observation. I hadn't looked at it that way. That's very true.
Yeah, I mean, New York's New York. I mean, New York has a million of other industries. While, I mean, don't get me wrong, LA is it's the second biggest city in the country, and it's massive, but it's based and built on in the film industry. So if you if you took the film industry out completely, like, the whole city would fall apart.
It would dry up somewhat. Yeah, New York. Well, New York, I mean, I think you're right, because I think New York is New York, and there happens to be film activity.
Right,
here.
Exactly.
The city, I mean, they'll lose some income.
It's like London, like London. There's some film in London, and there's a lot of film in London, don't get me wrong. But if all the film industry left London,
London will be London.
London will be London. LA is very distinctive that way.
Yeah.
So after shooting so many indie films over the years, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen filmmakers make?
Oh my God.
It's going to be a long podcast.
No, I'll keep it short.
No, it's okay.
But I think, I think preparation, I think people take pre-production for granted.
Mm-hmm.
I think I love pre-production. I love sitting down with the people that I'm going to work with in the mud later on and sort of toss out ideas. I mean, you have the script, you have the director's vision, but there's so much fun that could be had at that point. And I mean fun. I think people look at it as chore and they think they just want to get to the nitty gritty and that's the fun. And, being on set and shooting is fun. Mm-hmm. But that pre-production, that time leading up to it where you get to like see source material or look through color palettes or say, these are the costumes. These are the things that we could do. How do we execute this shot? Well, let's look at things that have been done before. Let's try to come up with something that's innate to your film, a signature shot that only will be seen in your film and a reason for it. And I always talk to directors about that when I'm shooting for them. I'm saying, let's start thinking of a style or shots that you want to execute that you think might be hard to do, but that are innate to the storyline, not just a gimmick. Because, you can come up with a nice shot, put it on a dolly and pull it off of a dolly and have the guy go in the rest of the way with a steady cam. And
I Am Cuba style, right?
Exactly. But I'm talking about shots that are signature that, if they weren't moving, they could be a poster. And pre-production is amazing. I think a lot of emerging filmmakers, and sometimes even more seasoned pros, don't take the time to enjoy that process because, there's so much creativity that can happen there. And not just from you. And I always tell directors this that are emerging too when I'm on a panel or something. It's like, listen, be open. Don't worry about it because what happens is at the end of the day, anything that happens on your film that's magic, they're not going to say it was the cinematographer. They're not going to say it was the writer. They're going to say, wow, what an amazing shot so-and-so did who's the director.
Right.
Whether it's a man or a woman. And so, that's a point when in the process where you can really sort of absorb a lot of information that, people are helping you to polish and tactics that you can employ and even ways to make it better. Because I think that, there's the script and then there's things that the actors bring to it or other people that are talented that are part of the crew, whether it's above or below the line, that can add something to it. So if you sort of like, if you lock yourself away mentally in that it's only going to be your way or the highway, you're not going to be very effective as a director. And I think those are the ones that we normally read about in the trades where the battles happen and people are walking off set because it's like, unless you're on a tour where your vision is so razor sharp that unless it's done your way, people are not going to know that it's your work. There's a difference, but you've earned that right.
Right. James Cameron wasn't James Cameron when he did his very first movie.
Exactly.
Neither was Michael Mann.
And even Guillermo del Toro. I saw a short of his that was an early piece, which was okay. And that's probably as much as I can say. It was okay.
Right.
But, now, look at him now. He's amazing.
Right.
And so we all have to start somewhere. And I've done short films that I'll never show. Maybe if like in some epoch I become, known and somebody wants to throw it on as, look at back when. But not while I'm developing. I'm not, it's not going to be seen.
Of course. But,
we all get there. We all have to do it.
Yeah, I was actually I just did a post on Indie Film Hustle about Quentin Tarantino's first film.
Yes, I saw
the my best friend my best friend's birthday, right. And when I found it, I'd heard of it, but I'd never seen it before. So I thought I wanted to kind of bring it to everyone's attention, because when you watch it, you see the seeds of genius,
right? Kind
of like you can see the dialogue, you can hear his voice there. I mean, it's not a good film, so it's very, very bad, but you can sense and see that. And it's such a wonderful thing to go back to a director like Tarantino or any, master of his craft or her craft and go back to their early, even first work to really see what it looked like from that point to Pulp Fiction.
Because I think we all have our own voice. I think, that's another mistake young emerging filmmakers make, that it's like, they get so caught up in wanting to
be the next Guillermo, be the next Guillermo. Right.
Exactly. What's my style? That, that they get bogged down by, trying to create style instead of just doing what they would do in any way, if there was nobody else around. And then that becomes style, because style is really an imprint of who you are and how you see things, not something, a gimmick you come up with, although that can be part of it. I think it's, there's a reason why certain filmmakers will have a certain shot in all their films over and over, but they use it at the right time. There's a language to it, and we realize it because we've seen it before, but we also, if we had never seen it, it's not something that would jump out at us. It's integral to the storytelling. And
that's one thing I always tell filmmakers too, that they don't. A lot of people always want to be like, I want to be the next Quentin Tarantino. I want to be the next Guillermo del Toro. I want to be the next Robert Rodriguez. I'm like, you're not gonna be. That shouldn't be your.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Your goal should be the next Eddie Pagan, the next Alex Ferrari, that be you. And if you notice that all these guys you're talking about, they're all being themselves. None of them copied anyone other than Tarantino, who copies from everyone, who's now made it an art of copying everybody, filtering it through his filter.
Yeah, but he's like one of these ultimate cinephiles who like in his work, he's just paying homage to everyone who's blown him away before.
Right.
But so in that sense, he is being him in the sense that he's the ultimate person that provides homages to other people that he admires. How many people
in his voice, though, but in his voice and his taste and his tone. And a lot of filmmakers always get caught up. And I've seen so many filmmakers just like trying to be this or trying to be that movie, or this is hot now, so I'm going to do this. I'm like, you're not going to make it.
It's not happening.
It's not happening. So can you give any advice to any budding cinematographers in the audience?
Yeah, I think the one thing that's being lost these days with all this digital platform, which is, it's a blessing
and a curse,
and a curse, because I think what's happening is people are forgetting the true nature of optics. Learn your lenses, learn the language of cinematographer. What does a wide shot convey? What is a shot, shot through a longer lens, a telephoto lens, convey, and study your films. There's a way of using these lenses at the right time, and particularly when you're doing coverage, and what look does it provide to the palette? Because not only are there different types of lenses, and different types of lenses give you a different aesthetic look, but various focal lengths just do provide a different thing. Some are just a statement, some are an exclamation point. And one of the things I see a lot happen these days is that, somebody will just rent a zoom lens, a wide to a moderate telephoto, and instead of using various points of the lens, instead of using primes, but I mean, if you're on a budget and you get a zoom lens, that's okay. But use the full scale of the lens at the proper time. If you're going to do a close-up or a very, sort of portrait shot, go to the far end of the lens, go a little bit more telephoto. And instead what I see is they'll still be on the short end of the lens on, let's say, a 24. And instead of like going and zooming in and getting a shot with a particularly amount of depth of field, is that they'll actually just get closer to the actor or actress. And so now you have a 24 millimeter lens a foot from the actress, and they're looking like they're warped.
Right.
Instead of it being sort of a beauty shot or more something that brings focus just to what's in their subconscious, but on the other hand, with the fact that everybody's now using these DSLRs, it's everybody wants their shot to be blown out, to have like a shallow depth of field. So every shot has a shallow depth of field. And so, it doesn't work. You have to learn the language, study films, and
study your craft.
Study your craft.
Now, how would you approach selling and marketing an indie horror film in today's world? Like, you've seen a lot of filmmakers try to do it. How would you approach it, or what advice would you give to an indie filmmaker trying to get noticed?
Well, I mean, social media is one way. Obviously, at this point, there's no way around it. In fact, it's kind of flipped on its head now that's what we're taught should be the thing. I mean, there's some filmmakers out there that are so young that that's all they've known.
I know.
They don't know. They don't know the old advertising, the old marketing, and
magazines,
and magazines
TV
and
commercials.
So there's different ways of getting the word out there. I think, but we get stuck with this social media thing, which is an advantage. But you still have to use the old world tactics of refining your message and getting that message out there. Social media is just one tool, whereas marketing and advertising and publicity is a craft, just like filmmaking. And I think if you forego the craft of marketing and publicity and you think that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram is going to do it for you, no, that's just a message out. But if you don't tweak it and make it interesting and get it before the right people, you're back to square one because everybody's doing it. You know what I mean? There's you don't have the fountain of youth at your disposal. You know, nobody stands out as beautiful if everybody has the pill that makes them, beautiful. Then it's like, what's the distinction? And so I think the thing that I would say to emerging filmmakers is partly what you said in your podcast about connecting with people and having the tact and tenacity to follow through. Have the tact in the sense that don't bombard people and be obnoxious. Find the right way to get yourself introduced, even if it takes 3 or 4 times. Because I think if somebody hears your name once and it's in a very casual environment, and then they hear it in a newsletter, and then they hear it the next time you meet them, they say, "Oh yeah, I remember you. We met." So, but if you're bombarding them, you just become that obnoxious person that is just occupying their time and just, who wants that? And then be prepared. Be really prepared that when you get that moment to shine in front of someone, that you're going to be able to answer all their questions, right? Better than anyone. They shouldn't be filling in the blanks for you. There's nothing worse than going into a session where you're pitching a project at any level. And it doesn't have to be only when you're in the big studios. It could be with anybody. And someone with a small production company who's looking to do films can also be your stepping stone, someone that has as much budget as you do at this point. But the fact that you're going in and you're the one that should know that project better than anyone. When I've gone into a room or been in a room when somebody's pitching a project and they're stumbling and I'm filling in the blanks for them, that's not good because you should be the one in that room that knows that project better than anyone. And also the part about passion, I think people seem to think that they have to turn it on when they're in front of people, and they think that being passionate is being overly bubbly. That's not passion. Passion is when you're homeless and you're still making films. I went through that. Not a lot of people know that, but I went through a period where I was homeless for about 4 months, sleeping in my office because I had gone through a separation. I was still making my films. Nobody had a clue. And passion didn't happen in the room when I went in and all of a sudden I started smiling. My passion was that I wasn't going to give up my craft and that I had the tenacity to work on it every day, even though I was trying to decide between a cup of coffee and printing out a page in a script. That's passion, So I think people need to kind of reorient themselves in these terms that are floating around. And I think your podcast is one of those places because you're giving them the real source. You're giving them the real information that most people on panels aren't telling them.
I appreciate that. That's why I started Indie Film Hustle, man. I really wanted to kind of get that out there, and because I've seen, both of us have been around the game long enough, and we've seen so many filmmakers coming through our doors in one way, shape, or form that they just get eaten up by the system. Right. And just a little bit of information, little tweaks here and there can make such a huge difference to a filmmaker trying to make it. And now I'm, the goal of Indie Film Hustle is also just to kind of build a career, make a sustainable living doing what you love to do. And it's also something I'm trying to do. I'm going to be shooting a film next year and doing different things to try to sustain myself as a filmmaker, just doing what I love to do.
And I think that's the distinction with the stuff that the way we do it. And I've certainly seen it in your podcast is that we're not preaching from the platform of the podium. We're in this also. We're squirrels trying to get our nuts as well. We're out there just like you are. We're just giving you information on what's worked for us. Right. And a lot of it is common sense. It's just basically saying, let's not get caught up in these conventions of social media and how people have become so rude because they just want to cut to the chase, that people at the end of the day are still people. And you're still going to rub people the wrong way if you take the wrong approach. So step back, settle in, get prepared, and then use the right approach at the right time. It's no different than trying to pitch a horror movie to a station or network that all does comedies. Do your research. It's like back in the days when we used to do proposals, and you sent them out and you did your research and you pulled their annual reports, and you knew that this particular organization wasn't the right fit, so you move on.
Right.
So make sure that your pitches are a mission match. So that you're not wasting your time or someone else's, right?
I think
you'll never get back at the door, even when you have that comedy,
right? And I think a lot of stuff is a lot of filmmakers today are using the shotgun approach, which they just spray and scatter, with an Uzi, just like and eventually they'll hit something, and that's you're just going to just piss people off, and like you said, even when you do have that comedy script, because you never took the time to build that relationship up.
That's the worst thing you could do, and we have the tools these days at our disposal. Oh my God, if we would have had this back in the 80s.
Oh my God, can you imagine?
With the field being as limited as it was, but still having these tools.
Can you imagine what 80s films would have been like in today's technology? Can you imagine what Jim Cotta? We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Would have looked like what the Cannon boys would have done.
Exactly. So so it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. It's just a matter of navigating that, so you get more of the blessings and less of the curse.
Yeah.
You don't want to be that cursed filmmaker. There's an old term a friend of mine's, Derek Partridge, uses all the time. He's done quite a few films together with me. He did A Miracle Spanish Harlem and a lot of others. And he says, when you get the stank, that just stay, it's your reputation. You get the stank, and no matter where you go, people can smell it. It's just like part of you. And if you do it wrong for too long a period, you end up getting the stank.
It's tough. I know what you mean. I've known filmmakers like that they get that stank, that they screw people over, or they're not doing it right, and all of a sudden, it's as big of a business as it is. It's extremely small.
Exactly.
It's extremely small. I mean, and you have no idea who that one person that you screwed over has a connection to. I mean, look at our relationship. We've known each other for 10 years. We know a lot of the same people.
Right.
We don't run in the same circles, but we do know a lot of the same people. And if I would have screwed you over, you would have screwed me over. God knows how many jobs over the last 10 years that might have affected.
That's right.
Or connections or things like that. And people, especially the younger filmmakers, they don't think long game. They only think instant. And if they could just start thinking about the long game a little bit more, I think more filmmakers would be more succcessful. Yeah. So I have 2 more questions for you, sir.
Sure.
They're very, very difficult questions, so be careful.
What did I have for breakfast this morning?
No. Where do you see latinhorror.com in 5 years?
Actually, that's not a very hard question, because I've been working on a game plan for that. Well, one of the things we're developing now is a platform called Miedo Marketing.
I love that.
Miedo Marketing.
Which can you translate that for the audience?
Fear marketing. Miedo is fear in Spanish.
Okay.
So we've kind of taken the Spanish convention as part of the name, and the English to finish it off. Miedo marketing. One of the things I like to do is make sure that people understand phrases that, from our culture, and no different than, saying a schmear on a bagel. Right. We make use of those kind of conventions as well. And Miedo marketing is a platform. One of the things I get a lot from publicists is, can you promote this film? Can you promote that film? And that's fine when I was developing the thing, but these people are working. These people are sending me these press releases from their office from 9 to 5. And getting paid. So, and I've been doing this long enough and covering the rent in other ways, but also, getting advertising every once in a while. And then it occurred to me that, why do we have to do this just as a trade-off?
It's a hobby.
Or as a trade-off, because I get a lot of access to screenings and actors and directors that are doing these films, kind of almost as a trade-off for publicizing their films. And I don't publicize the ones that I don't like. If you're going to see something in Latin horrors, because we're reviewing it because we like the film to some degree. We may not like all of it, we'll say so. But if a film is really bad, I'm not wasting my time reviewing a film that's bad. And so we created Miedo Marketing, which is going to be continuing to roll out, which is a platform for us to do marketing for the sector that's trying to reach the Latino and that loves horror films. We have a really substantial database that we've built over time that is not based on spam. These are people that have said, I want more of what you're offering or what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens to a lot of publicity companies is that at the point that they get a job, let's say they're going to do a romantic film, they have to then find the people that are probably geared to leaning toward that kind of genre. And so they start looking out for the blogs, et cetera, that kind of feature that, the same way they trip over Latin Horror's website when they're looking to promote horror films. And so I figured, there's time to cut out the middleman and generate that income for ourselves instead of doing it for someone at no cost or as a trade-up. And so that's launching. That's going to be a build. That's almost like a sidearm or a marketing sidearm. It's an entirely for-profit business that's going to be sort of, have Latin Horror as the engine, powered by, as sometimes I see on websites, and and the other thing is that we're going into production ourselves. We've produced a handful of short horror films under the Latin Horror label, and there's a point we're reaching out to different companies to see how we can partner up with them to find content and partner with people to produce films, originally low budget features, but, we'll scale it up as we go forward. But the beautiful thing about Latin horror and horror as a whole is that it's one of the genres that the return on investment is the greatest, because a lot of the horror films are done for relatively small budgets. Mm-hmm. And as you see week after week when these films, the really good ones, roll out, is that the return on investment is astronomical in some sense. That's why people keep making them and hoping that they hit that pot of gold, like the
paranormal activity.
Sure. Those. And actually, even Paranormal Activity, the producers that have kind of taken notice of the Latino audience, because the last one they made was all Latino characters, and it was based on Latino mythology. Mm-hmm. So they recognize the audience. So that's one of the things that's out there. Those two things, Miedo Marketing, and also Latin Horror producing its own content in partnership with other entities.
Very cool. Now, the toughest question of the evening: what are your top favorite 3 horror films of all time?
Oh, that's easy too. Without question, The Exorcist, The Thing.
Okay.
And the one that I saw the first time ever, even though it's kind of a campy British-made film, is Tales of the Crypt, the original one.
The original Tales of the Crypt, not the one, was it Cinemax that released the original?
Yeah, they've done a couple of versions.
Sure.
And it's a great film too. It's a really interesting film, but the original, there's something campy about it. And I think just because it was the first horror film that I ever saw in a theater that spooked me out, it's always going to be in the pantheon for me.
Very cool. Yeah, The Thing is like that.
The original. Well, and actually, I shouldn't say the original, the second, because there was done one in the 50s, a black and white one.
Oh, yeah, that's the first thing. Yeah.
That's right. Because everybody, even when they made the third one, people were like, oh, how could they?
He did it.
Forget that Carpenter's Thing was also a remake.
Right. But he did such a good job that people forgot about the original.
Yeah. It's an amazing film.
And the funny thing is that they originally thought it was, they called it pornography, and it was horrible, and he couldn't even get arrested, and
exactly,
and now it's looked upon as like he's a genius,
right.
and I actually just saw They Live the other day.
Yeah.
What a great flick that was,
I'm currently doing that here now, revisiting all his canon of films as an homage, but also as just orientation to myself.
Yeah, I haven't seen Big Trouble in Little China since I was a teenager. So it's on my list it's on my queue to watch now, because I went through a little John Carpenter now after I saw the interview with him and Robert Rodriguez on the director's chair.
Yeah. But listen to us talking about these things. This is like when you know that someone who loves film. We're talking like little boys. Like, because this is we live and breathe this, and even if the industry went away, we'd still be locked up in our homes, cracking open the DVDs until the point that the DVD player wouldn't work anymore.
Or actually crack opening the Netflix queue or the Amazon Hulu, because that's a whole other conversation.
That's right.
I've talked to some people in regards to this generation will never understand video stores.
Right.
They won't understand the magic that was at a video store that you can go
going
to.
Down the aisles.
Finding new stuff, things that you would have never seen, looking at a box, grabbing it, feeling it, that amazing artwork, where the artwork promised you something that obviously was not going to happen.
Oh, obviously. Yeah.
Like, I worked in a video store when I was in high school. So, my favorites were the Slimerama, the girls of Slimerama and the Bolorama. Which sorority babes in the Slimerama Bolorama.
Yes.
Thank you. Obviously, Toxic Avenger, a New York, a great indie New York film.
Yeah,
by Lloyd, and
that one is tossed around a lot as being remade, and it never gets really.
Because actually, I'm trying to get Lloyd on the show. I really want to get Lloyd on the show because I've met Lloyd a few times at festivals and stuff, and I think his story is such a unique thing about what he's done and how the industry has treated him over the years. I mean, he obviously makes his TraumaCon style movies. It's his stuff. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. And whether you love it or hate it, and it all kind of started with a Toxic Avenger. I remember watching Toxic Avenger, and I'm like, what the hell is this? But if you remember, there was a moment in time where there was a Toxic Avenger TV show, like a cartoon show. There was like lunch boxes and stuff. And Lloyd said that at one point the studio stepped in and like killed it. Like they didn't allow him to do it anymore. That's what he says. Back in the day, who knows if what's the truth or not? But he's a very interesting story of he's as independent as you can get. At this point in the game. And it's fascinating. But yeah, like going through the video stores and seeing that one, those kind of films.
But also that's that great period in the genre where like everybody was doing it, even though it was, it was hard to make these films, like you're talking about, a lot of them were shot on film and all that. It's like people were still rolling them out. There was like, people were being very clever and getting their films made.
But the thing is also back then, literally all you had to do was make a film.
Yeah.
And you would sell it because there was not enough product out there. So even if it was a horrible piece of crap that you shot on 35 mil and put it out, it was going to get sold. You were going to make some sort of money with it.
I got to say, whenever I go to the horror section of Netflix, man, it looks like that's still happening today.
Well, now.
They need some content.
Yeah.
They're throwing up everything up there.
It's bad. It's bad.
Yeah.
But So anyway, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me in two places. They can go to latinhorr.com, which is the page that's been up like about 8 years now. They can also find me, as a photographer, as a still photographer that's been shooting for like 40 years. They can go to thepaganimage.com. And that's more just my work as a photographer, both in the South Bronx and since then, kind of social documentary photography and journalist. There's a lot of articles up there that I've written as well.
But how is that possible if you're only 30, sir?
I wish I was only 30. I wish I was only 30. With the information that I have now, I wish I was
we could
30.
we could do some damage, bro.
We could do some damage. Body blows. But definitely those two places, and emails are up there. People really want to reach out and just talk. And I do answer my emails. It's ironic because people, you tell people, they could reach out and they all say they will. And, a lot of the people that have become friends over the years with me is people that really followed too. And like you say, they sort of get an interest in you and you get an interest in them. So I'm always really willing to give information to young emerging filmmakers, to the limits of my ability, because I'm not the kingmaker, but, But the idea still holds true that if you have a little information and you're willing to share it with people that haven't gone that route yet, you're sort of passing it forward. And I'm always willing to do that. So if anybody wants to reach out on either end, whether it's about photography or cinematography or just the horror genre, particularly the Latin horror genre, or anybody that wants to talk 80s horror, that's fine. Give me a buzz, send me an email. I'm willing to do that. That's where I live. That's not a soundbite or a little paragraph on the page. That's who I am. So,
well, if you
I'm more than happy to kind of like, chill with you for a minute or two.
Very cool. So everyone definitely check out latinhorror.com if you guys are horror fans. It's a great site, and it's an intelligent site, which is rare to find nowadays when you're talking about horror. It's very intelligently written and very well put together and very well curated.
Thank you so much.
So thank you so much for coming by and sharing some time with us in the Indie Film Hustle tribe. I really appreciate it, Eddie.
It's my pleasure to come aboard, and I'm not saying this lightly when I think your podcast is going to go far, because it's definitely, you're putting out some information there that most people are not willing to give, despite their, the secret of at every panel or every book or every article. They're not secrets; they're just more of the same package to sell. Your stuff is actually, you're talking about what people are not talking about, and I think filmmakers in general should take advantage of that.
Thank you very much, Eddie. I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, man. And like always, there will be sangre, my friend.
I hope you guys had as much fun listening to that as I did having that interview with Eddie. He's a trip and very knowledgeable about not only Latin horror, but horror in general. Don't forget, hey guys, head over to latinhorror.com if you're into horror films. Eddie's got a great site, and it's, like I said, intelligently written horror critiques and information about not only good horror films, but the subgenre of Latin horror, which is pretty awesome. So, guys, don't forget to head over to filmfestivaltips.com. That's filmfestivaltips.com. So I can share with you my 6 secrets on getting into film festivals for cheap or free. To help me get into over 500 film festivals all around the world, and hopefully can help you guys as well. So, and if you guys are digging the show, and apparently by their download numbers, you guys are digging the show. Thank you so much for all the love that I've been getting for the show. I'm going to keep trying to do as many of these shows as possible, sticking to my two episodes a week schedule. So if you really love the show and want to help us out, please head over to iTunes and leave us a honest review of the show. It helps us out dramatically on the rankings of iTunes. So thanks again, guys, so much for listening, and have a scary Halloween, a safe Halloween, and don't forget to keep on hustling. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.